The champagne glass slipped from the guest's hand, shattering against the marble floor as 200 of San Francisco's elite watched in stunned silence. At the altar, billionaire tech mogul Ezra Miller stood frozen, his face pale as he stared down at the 4-year-old flower girl who had just stopped his wedding cold. "Daddy, you have my special eyes," little Imani had shouted, pointing at her own mismatched brown and green eyes that perfectly mirrored the groom's rare genetic trait. The bride's bouquet trembled. The officiant's mouth hung open. And somewhere in the back of the venue, a woman named Brandy felt her world collapse as her deepest secret exploded in front of everyone. Welcome back to Mr. Ashbourne Golden Narratives, where the most incredible love stories unfold before your eyes. If you're new here, subscribe now because today's tale will leave you breathless. Hit that like button if you believe in destiny, and comment below about the most shocking family revelation you've ever witnessed. Now, let's go back to the story. Brandy Jones pressed her phone against her ear while balancing a stack of vendor contracts in her other hand. The morning sun streamed through her Oakland apartment window, illuminating the chaos of her small living room where wedding planning materials covered every surface. "Emma, slow down. I can barely understand you," Brandy said, watching 4-year-old Imani carefully pour cereal into her bowl at their tiny kitchen table. "Food poisoning," Emma's weak voice crackled through the speaker. "Started at 3 this morning. I can't even stand up without getting dizzy, let alone manage the Ashworth Miller wedding." Brandy's stomach dropped. Emma's event planning business was already hanging by a thread after 2 clients had canceled last month. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that I'm calling you from my bathroom floor." Emma's laugh turned into a groan. "Brandy, this wedding is everything. Victoria Ashworth's family has connections that could make or break my company. If this fails, what exactly are you asking me to do?" Brandy already knew the answer, but she needed to hear it. "Supervise the vendors. Make sure everything runs smoothly. The setup crew knows what they're doing, but someone needs to be there with authority to make decisions." Emma paused. "I'll split the fee with you. 50-50. Brandy's eyes drifted to the stack of unpaid bills on her counter. Imani's daycare payment was due Monday, and her part-time job at the coffee shop barely covered their basic expenses. The wedding fee would solve 3 months of financial stress. "Mommy, can I have strawberries?" Imani asked, her voice sweet and hopeful. Brandy looked at her daughter's expectant face, those distinctive mismatched eyes sparkling with morning energy. They'd run out of fresh fruit 2 days ago, but Imani never complained about their simple meals. "Of course, baby. Let me finish this call first. Emma, I don't know anything about high society weddings. What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong. The vendors are professionals, the timeline is set, and the venue coordinator handles most of the logistics. You just need to be the point person, make sure everyone stays on schedule." Emma's voice grew more desperate. "Please, Brandy. I'm begging you." Brandy closed her eyes, weighing her options. She could spend Saturday at her usual routine laundry, grocery shopping with coupons, maybe a trip to the park if they were lucky. Or she could take a chance on something that might change their circumstances. "What time do I need to be there?" 10 o'clock. The venue is Silverbrook Vineyard in Napa Valley. I'll text you all the vendor contact information and the timeline. Relief flooded Emma's voice. "Thank you. You're saving my life." After hanging up, Brandy stared at her phone, already second-guessing her decision. She'd never managed anything more elaborate than Imani's preschool birthday parties. "Mommy, you look worried," Imani observed, climbing down from her chair to wrap small arms around Brandy's waist. "Just thinking about work, sweetheart?" Brandy smoothed her daughter's dark curls, marveling at how perceptive she was. "How would you like to go on an adventure today?" Imani's face lit up. "What kind of adventure?" "We're going to a fancy wedding at a vineyard. There will be beautiful flowers and music, maybe even dancing. Like in the princess movies?" Imani bounced on her toes with excitement. "Exactly like that." Brandy's heart squeezed. Her daughter deserved so much more than their cramped apartment and secondhand everything. Maybe this job would be the start of something better. 2 hours later, Brandy navigated her aging Honda through the winding roads of Napa Valley, Imani chattering excitedly in the backseat about castles and princesses. The Silverbrook Vineyard emerged like something from a fairy tale, rolling hills covered in grapevines, elegant stone buildings, and gardens that looked professionally maintained. "It's so pretty." Imani pressed her face against the window. "Are we really going to work here?" "Mommy's going to work. You're going to sit quietly and maybe color in your book." Brandy parked near the main building, gathering her supplies and trying to project confidence she didn't feel. The venue was already bustling with activity. Florists arranged elaborate centerpieces, caterers set up stations in the reception area, and a string quartet practiced near what would become the ceremony space. Everything looked expensive and perfectly coordinated. "You must be Brandy." A sharp-featured woman in an elegant black suit approached them. "I'm Patricia Henley, Victoria's wedding coordinator." Emma briefed me on the situation. Patricia's gaze swept over Brandy's simple dress and Imani's presence with barely concealed disapproval. "I wasn't expecting you to bring a child." "I couldn't find a sitter on such short notice," Brandy said, lifting her chin. "She won't be any trouble." "See that she isn't. This wedding has been featured in 3 magazines and everything must be perfect." Patricia's tone suggested she doubted Brandy's ability to deliver perfection. The next few hours passed in a blur of vendor check-ins, timeline confirmations, and minor crisis management. The ice sculpture delivery was delayed, the string quartet needed additional power outlets, and the florist discovered a shortage of white roses for the bridal bouquet. Through it all, Imani remained remarkably well-behaved, coloring quietly at a corner table and occasionally helping Brandy organize paperwork. Several vendors commented on her good manners and striking eyes. "Your daughter is beautiful," the head florist Maria said during a brief break. "Those eyes are extraordinary." "Thank you. She gets them from her father." The words slipped out before Brandy could stop them, bringing an unwelcome pang of old pain. "He must be quite handsome," Maria said kindly. Brandy managed a smile. "He is." She rarely talked about Imani's father, even to herself. The memory of that night 4 years ago remained vivid. The charity gala where she'd worked coat check, the unexpected conversation with a brilliant, charming man who'd made her feel like the most interesting person in the room. She'd known he was wealthy and important, but for those few hours he'd just been Ezra, someone who laughed at her jokes and listened to her dreams. The pregnancy test 2 months later had changed everything. Her attempts to contact him had been met with cold professionalism from his assistant, making it clear that whatever she thought had happened between them was a mistake he preferred to forget. "Mommy, something's wrong with the flower girl," Imani said, tugging on Brandy's sleeve. Brandy looked up to see Patricia rushing toward them, her composed expression cracking with panic. "Crisis," Patricia announced without preamble. "The flower girl has a fever of 102 degrees. Her mother just called from urgent care. We need a replacement and we need one now." Brandy's mind raced through possibilities. "Can you call other families? Maybe someone has a daughter the right age. The ceremony starts in 2 hours. There's no time for fittings or rehearsals." Patricia's gaze landed on Imani with calculating intensity. "She's perfect. Right age, well-behaved, and she's already here." "Absolutely not." Brandy's response was immediate and firm. "Imani is here because I had no choice not to participate in the wedding." "Brandy, please." Victoria Ashworth is not a woman who accepts disappointment gracefully. "If this wedding fails because we couldn't find a flower girl." Patricia's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "Emma's business won't survive the fallout and I'm guessing you need this paycheck." The threat was clear and unfortunately accurate. Brandy looked down at Imani, who was listening to every word with wide, curious eyes. "What's a flower girl?" Imani asked. "A flower girl walks down the aisle before the bride and sprinkles flower petals," Patricia explained, her tone shifting to coaxing sweetness. "It's a very important job and you'd get to wear a beautiful dress." Imani's face lit up with wonder. "Really? Like a princess?" Brandy felt trapped between her protective instincts and harsh financial reality. The wedding fee would cover 3 months of daycare, groceries, and maybe even some new clothes for Imani. But exposing her daughter to this world of wealth and privilege felt dangerous in ways she couldn't articulate. "Please, Mommy?" Imani's voice was soft but hopeful. "I promise I'll be good." Looking into her daughter's trusting face, Brandy felt her resolve crumble. "One walk down the aisle. You drop the petals and come straight back to me. That's it." "Deal," Patricia said quickly, already pulling out her phone. "I'll have the seamstress alter one of the backup dresses." As Patricia hurried away to arrange the details, Brandy knelt beside Imani, smoothing her hair with gentle hands. "This is just pretend, okay? Like playing dress-up. After you walk down the aisle we go back to being regular people." Imani nodded solemnly, but her eyes sparkled with excitement. "Will there really be a prince?" "A groom," Brandy corrected. "And yes, he'll be there waiting for his bride." 4 hours and 17 minutes. That's how long Brandy had been putting out fires at what was supposed to be the wedding of the century. Her clipboard was now covered in frantic notes, her phone battery was at 12%, and her feet ached in the borrowed heels Patricia had insisted she wear. The ice sculpture is melting faster than expected, she reported into her headset, watching a server frantically position drip trays around the elaborate swan centerpiece. We need industrial fans now. Already on it, came the response from the catering manager. 85 minutes. Brandy checked her watch. 2:30. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 o'clock, and somehow, miraculously, everything was falling into place. The string quartet had found their power source, the floral arrangements were stunning, and the bride was reportedly calm and radiant in the bridal suite. "Mommy, I'm getting hungry," Imani said from her corner table, where she'd been remarkably patient all morning. Her coloring book was nearly finished, and she'd helped organize vendor contracts with the serious concentration only a 4-year-old could muster. "Just a little longer, sweetheart. After the ceremony, we'll get you something special to eat." Brandy squeezed her daughter's hand, grateful for her good behavior in such a chaotic environment. The venue had transformed into something magical. White silk draping caught the afternoon breeze, thousands of white roses created an aromatic pathway to the altar, and the vineyard backdrop looked like a painting. Guests were beginning to arrive, elegant women in designer dresses and men in perfectly tailored suits, all carrying themselves with the confidence that came from old money and established power. "Brandy." Patricia's voice cut through the ambient noise, sharp with fresh panic. "Emergency. Real emergency this time." Brandy's stomach clenched. They were 30 minutes from showtime. What now? The flower girl. Sophia Martinez. Her mother just called from the emergency room. High fever, possible strep throat. They're not coming. The words landed like a physical blow to Brandy's chest. She could see the domino effect already: delayed ceremony, upset bride, furious families, Emma's business destroyed. Options? Brandy asked, though her mind was already racing through impossible solutions. There are none. Every other child we know is either too old, too young, or lives too far away. The ceremony starts in 30 minutes. Patricia's composure was cracking. Victoria is going to lose her mind. Brandy looked around desperately, as if a replacement flower girl might materialize from the vineyard rose. Her gaze landed on Imani, who was watching their conversation with curious eyes. "No," Brandy said immediately, reading Patricia's expression. "Absolutely not. She's perfect, Brandy. Right age, she's been here all day so she knows the layout, and look at her, she's beautiful and well-behaved. She's my daughter, not a prop for your wedding." "Our wedding?" Patricia corrected sharply. "The wedding that's paying your bills and keeping Emma's business alive. The wedding that will be a disaster if we don't solve this problem right now." Imani stood up from her table, smoothing her simple sundress. "What's wrong?" Patricia knelt to Imani's level, her voice shifting to honey-sweet persuasion. "Sweetheart, we need a very special helper for the wedding. Would you like to be a flower girl?" "What does a flower girl do?" Imani asked, her distinctive eyes bright with interest. "You get to wear a beautiful white dress and walk down the aisle carrying a basket of rose petals. You sprinkle them on the ground to make a pretty path for the bride." Imani's face lit up with wonder. "Like making a rainbow but with flowers?" "Exactly like that." Brandy felt cornered. The practical part of her brain calculated the financial disaster if this wedding failed. The protective mother part screamed warnings about exposing Imani to this world of wealth and privilege. But looking at her daughter's excited expression, she realized the decision was already made. "One walk down the aisle," Brandy said firmly. "She drops the petals and comes straight back to me. No photos, no lingering, no meeting the wedding party." "Deal?" Patricia said quickly. "I'll get the seamstress." 20 minutes later, Imani emerged from the bridal suite looking like a fairy tale come to life. The simple white dress had been expertly altered to fit her small frame, and a crown of baby's breath nestled in her dark curls. She carried a wicker basket filled with white rose petals, her face glowing with excitement. "Do I look like a princess, Mommy?" Brandy's throat tightened with emotion. "You look absolutely beautiful, baby." "Remember what we practiced," Patricia instructed, adjusting Imani's flower crown. "Walk slowly, sprinkle the petals gently, and when you reach the altar, step to the side and wait for the bride." "I remember." Imani bounced on her toes, then caught herself and stood straighter. "I have to be very grown-up and important." The bridal march began, its familiar melody floating across the vineyard. Brandy positioned herself at the back of the ceremony area, where she could watch without interfering. The wedding party began their procession, groomsmen in charcoal gray suits, bridesmaids in flowing sage green gowns, each step perfectly timed to the music. From her vantage point, Brandy couldn't see the groom clearly. He stood with his back to the guests, tall and broad-shouldered in an impeccably tailored tuxedo. Something about his posture seemed familiar, but she dismissed the thought. Rich men all carried themselves the same way. "She's doing beautifully," whispered Maria, the florist who had paused beside Brandy to watch. Imani stepped onto the white runner with the gravity of someone given a sacred task. She walked carefully, her small hand dipping into the basket to scatter rose petals with artistic precision. The guests murmured appreciatively at her serious concentration and natural grace. Halfway down the aisle, Imani looked up and smiled at the assembled crowd, her confidence growing with each step. She was born for this, Brandy realized with a mixture of pride and worry. Her daughter had a natural elegance that belonged in this world of luxury and refinement. "Almost there," Brandy whispered, her hands clasped tightly together. Imani reached the altar area, still focused on her petal-scattering duty. She was supposed to step aside and wait for the bride, but something made her look up at the groom for the first time. She stopped walking. The basket slipped from her small hands, scattering the remaining petals at her feet in a white cascade. Her mouth fell open, and she stared up at the man in the tuxedo with an expression of pure shock and recognition. Brandy couldn't see what Imani was seeing, but she felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. Then Imani raised her small hand and pointed directly at her own face, her voice carrying clearly across the silent vineyard. "Daddy, you have my special eyes." The world stopped. 200 guests turned to stare at the 4-year-old who had just claimed the groom as her father. The string quartet's music faltered and died. Somewhere behind Brandy, a champagne glass shattered against stone. The groom turned slowly and Brandy's world collapsed. Ezra Miller. The man she'd spent one perfect night with 4 years ago. The man whose assistant had called her a gold digger. The man whose child she'd been raising alone while he built his empire and planned his society wedding. Their eyes met across the crowd of shocked faces, and she watched recognition dawn in his expression. Those distinctive mismatched eyes, one brown, one green, that Imani had inherited widened with understanding and something that might have been wonder. "I'm sorry," Ezra said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "I need a moment." He stepped down from the altar platform, ignoring the scandalized gasps from the wedding guests. Victoria stood frozen in her position, her bouquet trembling in her hands, but her face showed more curiosity than anger. Ezra knelt beside Imani, who was still pointing at her eyes with the innocent certainty of a child who had just solved a great mystery. "What's your name, sweetheart?" His voice was gentle, but Brandy could hear the underlying tension. "I'm Imani." Her voice rang with excitement. "Are you really my daddy? Mommy said I got my special eyes from my daddy and you have them too. See?" She pointed back and forth between their faces. "We match." A collective gasp rose from the wedding guests. Someone's phone was definitely recording this. Brandy felt her legs go weak. "Where's your mommy, Imani?" Ezra asked, his gaze already searching the crowd. "She's working. She's always working really hard to take care of me." Imani pointed toward the back of the venue. "She's been fixing all the broken things today." Ezra stood slowly, his movements careful and controlled. He extended his hand to Imani, who took it without hesitation, and began walking through the crowd of stunned guests. Brandy couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the single, terrifying reality that Ezra Miller was walking directly toward her, guided by their daughter's innocent trust. "Oh my," Maria whispered beside her. "That's quite a development." The crowd parted like water as Ezra approached, Imani skipping beside him and chattering about the pretty flowers and fancy dresses. Every step brought him closer to the confrontation Brandy had been dreading for 4 years. When he finally reached her, they stood in silence for a moment that felt like eternity. Up close, she could see the changes 4 years had brought: lines around his eyes, a more serious set to his mouth, the weight of responsibility in his shoulders. But those eyes were exactly the same, and they were looking at her with an intensity that made her stomach flip. "Hello, Brandy." Her name on his lips after 4 years of silence nearly destroyed her composure. "Ezra. This isn't how I want it." "Mommy?" Imani bounced between them, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. "I found my daddy. Isn't that the best surprise ever? He has my special eyes just like you said." Brandy's eyes filled with tears. "Imani, baby." "We need to talk," Ezra said quietly, his gaze never leaving Brandy's face. "All of us. Perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere more private," came a crisp, authoritative voice. Brandy turned to see an elegant elderly woman approaching them with the confidence of someone accustomed to taking charge. She had to be in her late 70s, but she moved with purpose, her silver hair perfectly styled and her dark eyes sharp with intelligence. "Grandmother," Ezra said, relief evident in his voice. "Eleanor Miller," the woman introduced herself to Brandy with a slight nod. "And you must be the mother of my great-granddaughter." The casual way she claimed Imani as family made Brandy's head spin. "Mrs. Miller, I can explain?" "I'm sure you can, dear. But not here." Eleanor's gaze swept the crowd of gawking guests, many of whom were now openly recording with their phones. "Victoria, darling, might we borrow the bridal suite?" Brandy looked around, realizing the bride had approached during their exchange. Victoria Ashworth stood nearby, still in her stunning wedding gown, but her expression was remarkably calm considering her ceremony had just been derailed. "Of course," Victoria said graciously. "Take all the time you need." "Your wedding," Brandy started, guilt washing over her. "I'm so sorry. This is your special day and I never meant." Victoria's smile was gentle, almost relieved. "Honestly, I think this might be exactly what needed to happen." Before Brandy could process what that meant, Eleanor was already organizing their retreat. "Ezra, bring Imani. Brandy, come along. We have quite a bit to discuss." The bridal suite was an oasis of calm compared to the chaos they'd left behind. Decorated in soft whites and golds, it featured comfortable seating arranged around a marble coffee table. Eleanor settled into a wingback chair like a queen holding court, while Imani immediately gravitated toward a vase of white roses. "These smell like heaven," Imani announced, standing on her tiptoes to sniff the blooms. Ezra remained standing near the window, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking anywhere but at Brandy. The silence stretched until Eleanor cleared her throat with obvious impatience. "Well, someone needs to start talking." Brandy took a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. "4 years ago, I was working coat check at your foundation's charity gala. Ezra and we spent the night together." She could feel Ezra's attention snap to her, but she kept her eyes fixed on Eleanor's face. "When I found out I was pregnant, I tried to contact him. I called his office multiple times, left messages with his assistant." The memory still stung. David Morrison made it very clear that Ezra wasn't interested in complications from one-night stands. "What?" Ezra's voice was sharp with shock. "What exactly did David say?" Brandy finally looked at him, seeing genuine confusion in his expression. "He said you were busy with the IPO launch and couldn't be bothered with gold diggers looking for a payday. He offered me money to disappear and never contact you again." Ezra's face went white. "Brandy, I fired David 3 years ago for exactly that kind of behavior. I had no idea you even tried to reach me." "It doesn't matter now," Brandy said, though her voice wavered. "I decided to raise Imani on my own. She's been my whole world." "Our world," Eleanor corrected firmly. "She's a Miller, which makes her family." Imani looked up from the roses, her attention caught by the serious tone of the conversation. "Are you talking about me?" "We're talking about how happy we are to meet you, sweetheart," Eleanor said, her stern expression softening completely. "Come here, darling." Imani skipped over, still clutching a rose she'd somehow acquired. "Yes, great-grandma Eleanor?" The title made Eleanor's composure crack into a genuine smile. "Tell me about yourself, Imani. What do you like to do?" "I like to draw and read stories and help Mommy cook." Imani's enthusiasm was infectious. "And I take dance class on Saturdays when Mommy has enough money for it." The innocent honesty was brutal. Brandy felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as their financial struggles were laid bare in front of Ezra and his grandmother. "Mommy works really hard so we can have nice things," Imani continued, oblivious to the tension her words created. "But sometimes she cries when she thinks I'm sleeping because the bills are scary numbers." Ezra moved closer, his voice gentle. "Imani, do you know who I am?" "You're my daddy." She said it with absolute certainty. "Mommy showed me a picture from a magazine once. She said you were very smart and very busy, but that you gave me my special eyes." Brandy's breath caught. She remembered that moment. Imani had been asking endless questions about her father, and Brandy had foolishly shown her a business magazine article, thinking it would satisfy her curiosity. "What else did Mommy tell you about me?" Ezra asked, kneeling to her level. Imani considered this seriously. "That you live far away and have important work to do. But that you would love me very much if you knew about me." She looked between her parents with 4-year-old wisdom. "Are you going to live with us now? Our apartment is kind of small, but I could share my room." The offer, delivered with such innocent generosity, made Ezra's eyes close briefly. When he opened them, they were bright with unshed tears. I would love nothing more than to be part of your life, sweetheart. But your mommy and I need to talk about how to make that work, okay? Okay. Imani threw her arms around his neck in an exuberant hug. I'm so happy I found you. Ezra held his daughter for the first time, his arms coming around her small frame as if she were made of spun glass. Over her head, his gaze met Brandy's and she saw wonder, regret, and something that might have been hope. A soft knock interrupted the moment. Victoria peered around the door, still in her wedding gown but somehow looking more relaxed than she had all day. I'm sorry to intrude, but the guests are getting restless. Should I ask them to move to cocktail hour? Ezra stood, still holding Imani's hand. Victoria, I'm so sorry. Your wedding day ruined because... Ezra. Victoria entered fully, closing the door behind her. Can I speak honestly? He nodded, though his expression was wary. I've been hiding something too. Victoria's composure finally showed cracks. I have severe endometriosis. I can't have children, and I've been too afraid to tell you because I know how much you want a family. The confession landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. When I saw you with Imani, Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger, when I saw your face light up, I realized you already have your family. You just found her. Ezra started to speak, but Victoria held up a hand. I care about you deeply. But we both know this marriage was as much about expectation as it was about love. You have a chance to be with someone who gave you the most precious gift in the world. She looked at Brandy with genuine warmth. And honestly, watching you two together even for these few minutes, there's something there that was never quite there with us. Victoria, you don't have to. I'm not bitter, she interrupted, and Brandy believed her. I'm relieved. We both deserve love that sets us on fire, not just love that makes sense on paper. Eleanor stood, smoothing her skirt with satisfaction. Well, that settles that rather neatly. She looked around the room at the assembled group. I propose we adjourn this gathering, send the wedding guests home with our apologies and an explanation that there's been a family emergency, which is true enough, and continue this conversation tomorrow when everyone's had time to process. But what about tonight? Imani piped up, her voice bright with excitement. Can Daddy come see our apartment? I want to show him my drawings. Brandy's heart hammered. Their tiny Oakland apartment with its second-hand furniture and peeling paint was hardly the place to entertain a billionaire. Actually, Ezra said carefully, I was hoping you and Mommy might want to stay at my house tonight. It has a pool and a big yard and I think you'd like it. Imani's gasp of delight was audible. Really? A pool? Mommy, can we? Please, please, please? Brandy looked helplessly between her daughter's excited face and Ezra's hopeful expression. I don't know. We don't have any clothes and... Details? Eleanor waved dismissively. Ezra has staff who can handle such things. What matters is that this family starts spending time together. Family. The word resonated through Brandy's chest. For 4 years, it had been just her and Imani against the world. The thought of expanding that circle was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. One night, she heard herself say, just to let Imani get to know you. Imani cheered and launched herself at Ezra again, who caught her easily and spun her around. This is the best day ever. I got to be a flower girl and I found my daddy. Victoria laughed, the sound genuine and warm. I think this worked out exactly as it was supposed to. As they prepared to leave the bridal suite, Eleanor placed a gentle hand on Brandy's arm. You've done a wonderful job raising her, my dear. But she deserves to know her entire family, and we deserve to know her. Mrs. Miller. Grandmother, Eleanor corrected with a smile. We're family now. And family takes care of each other. Outside, the sun was beginning to set over the vineyard, casting everything in golden light. The wedding guests had been graciously dismissed with promises of future celebrations, and the vendors were quietly packing up the elaborate decorations. Are you sure about this? Brandy asked Ezra as they walked toward his car. Everything's happening so fast. I've missed 4 years, he said quietly, watching Imani skip ahead of them. I don't want to miss another day. As they reached his Tesla, Imani pressed her face against the window in wonder. It's so shiny. Does it really drive itself? Would you like to find out? Ezra asked, opening the door for her. This is like a spaceship. Imani declared, settling into the back seat with reverent awe. Brandy slid into the passenger seat, still feeling like she was living someone else's life. This morning she'd been worried about paying bills. Tonight she was driving to a billionaire's house with the daughter he'd never known existed. Brandy, Ezra said quietly as they pulled away from the vineyard. I need you to know, if I had received your calls, if I had known about Imani, I would have been there. I would have been there for everything. She studied his profile in the fading light, seeing sincerity in every line of his face. I believe you. But Ezra, what happens now? We don't even know each other anymore. We're essentially strangers who happen to share a child. Then we get to know each other, he said simply. We have all the time in the world. In the back seat, Imani was chattering excitedly about everything she saw during the drive, her voice full of wonder and joy. For the first time in 4 years, Brandy allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, fairy tales could come true. Ezra's house emerged from the Palo Alto hills like something from a dream. The modern masterpiece was all glass and clean lines, with an infinity pool that seemed to disappear into the horizon and breathtaking views of the Bay Area twinkling below. Is this really where you live? Imani breathed, her face pressed against the car window as they wound up the private drive. It's just a house, Ezra said, but Brandy could see he was pleased by her reaction. It's like a castle in the clouds. Imani's excitement was infectious as they parked in the circular driveway. Do you have servants and everything? Ezra chuckled, the first genuinely relaxed sound Brandy had heard from him all day. I have a housekeeper named Mrs. Chin, and she's going to love meeting you. As if summoned by his words, the front door opened to reveal a petite Asian woman in her 50s, her face creased with concern and curiosity. Mr. Miller, I got your message about guests, but... Mrs. Chin stopped mid-sentence as her gaze landed on Imani, who was practically vibrating with excitement beside the car. Mrs. Chin, I'd like you to meet my daughter Imani and her mother Brandy. Ezra's voice carried a note of wonder, as if he was still processing the reality of those words. Mrs. Chin's eyes widened, then softened as she took in Imani's distinctive features. Your daughter. Of course. The eyes are unmistakable. She smiled warmly. Welcome home, little one. Thank you. Imani said politely, then looked up at the towering glass structure. Your house is so tall. Can you see the whole world from up there? Would you like to find out? Ezra asked, extending his hand to her. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. Soaring ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, and an open-concept design that made the space feel infinite. Everything was pristine and expensive, from the Italian marble floors to the contemporary art adorning the walls. Imani stood in the entryway, slowly turning in circles to take it all in. It's so clean and shiny. Do you really live here all by yourself? I do, Ezra admitted, and for the first time Brandy heard loneliness in his voice. That must be very quiet, Imani observed with 4-year-old wisdom. Our apartment is small, but it's never quiet because Mommy sings when she cooks and I practice my letters out loud. Brandy felt heat rise in her cheeks. Their cramped Oakland apartment with its thin walls and second-hand furniture seemed impossibly far from this world of luxury. I'd like to hear you practice your letters, Ezra said seriously. And I'd love to hear Mommy sing. She has a really pretty voice, Imani confided. She sings me to sleep every night with the song about the mockingbird. Mrs. Chin appeared with a tray of fresh fruit and juice boxes, having somehow anticipated a child's needs. I took the liberty of preparing the guest suite upstairs. There are pajamas and toiletries in appropriate sizes. How did you know what sizes to get? Brandy asked, amazed by the efficiency. Ezra looked slightly embarrassed. I may have called in a few favors. My assistant has connections in retail. Your assistant works on Saturday evenings? Brandy raised an eyebrow. When it's important, yes. His gaze met hers directly. This is important. Imani had discovered the infinity pool visible through the glass doors and was practically bouncing with excitement. Can I swim? Please? I know how. Mommy taught me at the community center. After dinner, Ezra promised. But first, would you like to see your room? The guest suite was larger than Brandy's entire apartment. A king-sized bed dominated the space, with a sitting area by the windows and an ensuite bathroom that looked like something from a luxury hotel. Someone had thoughtfully provided child-sized pajamas, toiletries, and even a selection of picture books. This bed is enormous, Imani announced, climbing onto it and spreading her arms wide. I could do cartwheels and still not fall off. Please don't test that theory, Brandy said quickly, but she was smiling. While Imani explored every corner of the room with the thoroughness of a 4-year-old, Ezra and Brandy found themselves alone on the private balcony overlooking the pool. This is surreal, Brandy said, accepting the glass of wine he offered her. This morning I was worried about paying Imani's daycare fees. Tonight I'm drinking wine that probably costs more than my monthly grocery budget. Money doesn't matter, Ezra said firmly. Not compared to what I've missed. 4 years of bedtime stories, first words, first steps, first days of school. I can't get that back. The pain in his voice was raw, and Brandy felt her own guilt rise to match it. Ezra, I'm sorry. I should have tried harder to reach you, should have. No. His voice was firm. You tried. You did what you thought was best for Imani with the information you had. I'm the one who's sorry. Sorry that my company culture allowed someone like David Morrison to think he could speak for me. Sorry that you've been struggling alone when you should have had support. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to Imani's delighted laughter drifting from inside the room. She's incredible, Ezra said softly. So smart, so curious. And her laugh. He trailed off, shaking his head. How do you do it? Single parenthood? Brandy smiled, thinking of her daughter's boundless energy and endless questions. Some days I barely survive it. But she's worth everything. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every moment of worry. She's the best thing I've ever done. Ezra corrected gently. The best thing we've ever done. The pronoun hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. For 4 years, Brandy had been the sole architect of Imani's world. The thought of sharing that responsibility was both relieving and terrifying. Daddy? Mommy? Imani's voice called from inside. Come see what I found. They returned to find her standing in front of a bookshelf, holding a leather-bound photo album. There are pictures of you when you were little, she announced to Ezra. You look just like me. Ezra's expression grew tender as he sat beside her on the bed. Those are from when I was about your age. My grandmother kept all the family photos. Imani flipped through the pages with careful reverence, pointing out similarities between her father's childhood photos and her own features. Look, you have the same nose as me. And the same chin. We definitely share some genes, Ezra agreed, his voice thick with emotion. What are genes? Imani asked, settling more comfortably against his side. They're like instructions that parents pass to their children. They decide things like what color your eyes are, how tall you'll grow, whether you'll be good at math or music. Did you give me the smart genes? Imani asked hopefully. Mommy says I'm very smart for my age. You're brilliant, Ezra said seriously. But that comes from both your mommy and me. Brandy watched the interaction with a mixture of joy and heartache. Seeing them together felt so natural, so right, that it made the years of separation even more painful. I'm hungry, Imani announced, closing the photo album carefully. And I want to swim. Dinner was a revelation. Mrs. Chen had prepared a child-friendly meal of grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread, but she'd also included mac and cheese, Imani's favorite. They ate on the terrace overlooking the pool, with Imani chattering about everything she'd seen and learned that day. This is the best chicken ever, she declared, taking another bite. Mrs. Chen, you're a magical cook. Mrs. Chen beamed with pleasure. Thank you, little miss. I haven't cooked for a child in many years. It's a joy. Do you have children? Imani asked with the directness only kids possessed. I have grandchildren in China. They're older than you now, but I remember when they were small. Mrs. Chen's expression grew wistful. Perhaps you'll visit again soon? I hope so. Imani said enthusiastically. Daddy, can we come back tomorrow? Ezra glanced at Brandy, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. That depends on what Mommy thinks is best. The weight of decision-making settled on Brandy's shoulders. Every choice she made now would affect not just her and Imani but Ezra too. The responsibility felt enormous. We'll see, she said diplomatically. Let's take things one day at a time. After dinner, Imani finally got her promised swim. Ezra had somehow procured a child-sized swimsuit in her exact size, and she splashed in the shallow end of the infinity pool with pure delight while her parents watched from poolside chairs. Look at me. I'm a mermaid, she called, attempting an underwater somersault. Very impressive, Ezra called back, his face soft with wonder. You're a natural swimmer. Mommy taught me, Imani said proudly. She says swimming is important for safety and fun. Your mommy is very wise, Ezra said, glancing at Brandy with something that might have been admiration. As the sun set over the Bay Area, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Imani finally tired herself out. She climbed from the pool wrapped in a fluffy towel, her hair dripping and her cheeks flushed with happiness. This has been the most amazing day of my whole life, she announced solemnly. I found my daddy, I got to be a flower girl, I swam in a magic pool, and I ate the best dinner ever. I'm glad you had fun, sweetheart, Brandy said, wrapping another towel around her daughter's shoulders. Can we do it again tomorrow? Imani asked hopefully. We'll see, Brandy repeated, but her resolve was weakening. Seeing Imani this happy, this complete, made it hard to imagine taking her away from this newfound family. Bath time was an adventure in the enormous marble bathroom, with Imani declaring the bathtub big enough for, at least 3 mermaids. Ezra hovered nearby, clearly wanting to help but uncertain of his role in the bedtime routine. Daddy, will you read me a story? Imani asked as Brandy helped her into the soft pajamas Mrs. Chen had provided. I'd love to, Ezra said, his voice catching slightly on the words. They settled into the king-sized bed together, Imani between her parents with a picture book spread across her lap. Ezra read with the careful attention of someone savoring every word, while Imani followed along, occasionally correcting his pronunciation or adding her own commentary to the story. You're a good reader, Daddy, she said sleepily as he closed the book. Will you tell me a bedtime story too? A made-up one? Ezra looked panicked for a moment, then caught Brandy's encouraging nod. What kind of story would you like? A story about a princess who finds her daddy and they live happily ever after, Imani said, snuggling deeper into the pillows. Ezra's gaze met Brandy's over their daughter's head, his expression soft with possibility. Once upon a time, he began, there was a brave princess who lived in a small castle with her beautiful, hard-working mother. As his voice wove the tale of a princess who went on adventures and discovered her father in an enchanted kingdom, Brandy felt something shift in her chest. The story was clearly about them, but transformed into fairy tale magic that made Imani's eyes shine with wonder. And they all lived happily ever after? Imani asked drowsily as the story concluded. They're still working on their happily ever after, Ezra said gently. But it's looking very promising. Within minutes, Imani was fast asleep, her small hand curled trustingly around Ezra's finger. They sat in the dim light of the bedside lamp, neither wanting to break the spell of the moment. She's perfect, Ezra whispered, his voice full of awe. She is, Brandy agreed softly. And she's yours. Ours, he corrected, echoing his earlier words. She's ours. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the guest house as Brandy finished braiding Imani's hair for school. 6 months had transformed their lives in ways she was still processing. The small but elegant guest house on Ezra's property had become their home, offering privacy while keeping Imani close to her father. Daddy's making pancakes again, Imani announced, peering through the window toward the main house. He's getting really good at the Mickey Mouse shape. Brandy smiled, remembering Ezra's first disastrous attempt at breakfast 6 months ago. Burnt edges, lopsided ears, and a kitchen covered in flour. Now he'd mastered the art of Saturday morning pancakes, complete with chocolate chip smiles. Go brush your teeth, then we'll head over, Brandy said, checking her watch. They had 30 minutes before Imani's soccer practice, which had become a weekly tradition that Ezra never missed. The transition hadn't been seamless. There had been awkward moments, disagreements about parenting styles, and the constant navigation of building a relationship while co-parenting. But slowly, carefully they'd found their rhythm. Morning, beautiful girls, Ezra called as they entered the kitchen. He was dressed casually in jeans and a Stanford t-shirt, his hair still slightly mussed from sleep. The sight of him in domestic mode still caught Brandy off guard sometimes. Morning, Daddy. Imani launched herself at him for their daily hug. Did you remember the chocolate chips? Would I forget the most important ingredient? Ezra lifted her onto the counter, where she could supervise the pancake flipping process. Brandy accepted the coffee he handed her, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. These small moments of contact had become more frequent lately, charged with an awareness they were both trying to navigate carefully. How did the conference call with Tokyo go? She asked, settling onto a bar stool. Better than expected. The merger should be finalized by next month. Ezra flipped a pancake with practiced ease. Which means I'll have more time for soccer practices and dance recitals. Speaking of dance, Imani said importantly, Miss Sarah says I'm ready for the advanced class. But it costs more money. Brandy felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with financial discussions. Even living in the guest house rent-free, she insisted on maintaining some independence. She still worked part-time at the coffee shop and contributed what she could to Imani's expenses. We'll figure it out, sweetheart, Brandy said automatically. Actually, Ezra said carefully, I was hoping we could talk about that. About a lot of things, really. Something in his tone made Brandy look up sharply. What kind of things? Important things. But after soccer practice. He glanced meaningfully at Imani, who was now arranging chocolate chips into elaborate patterns on her pancake. The soccer field was alive with the chaos of 5- and 6-year-olds chasing a ball with more enthusiasm than skill. Ezra had become a fixture on the sidelines, cheering louder than any other parent and taking more photos than seemed humanly possible. "She's getting really good," commented Sarah Martinez, another soccer mom who'd become friendly with Brandy over the months. "And Ezra's completely smitten. It's adorable." Brandy watched as Ezra high-fived Imani after she successfully stole the ball from an opponent. "He's making up for lost time." "You both are," Sarah observed. "I have to say, when you first told me about the situation, I was skeptical. Rich guy suddenly discovering he has a kid? But watching you three together, it's obvious this is real." Real. The word carried weight. What they'd built over 6 months felt substantial, but Brandy still sometimes felt like she was living in someone else's life. After practice, they stopped for ice cream at Imani's favorite parlor. She chattered about her goals and her teammates while working on a cone that was almost as big as her head. "Daddy, will you come to my dance recital next month?" she asked between licks. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Ezra promised. "I'll be in the front row with the biggest bouquet of flowers they allow." "What about Mommy's birthday next week? Are you coming to that too?" Brandy nearly choked on her ice cream. "Imani, we haven't planned anything for my birthday. But we should." Imani's eyes lit up with excitement. "Daddy, we should throw Mommy a surprise party? With cake and presents and everything." "That sounds like an excellent idea," Ezra said, his gaze meeting Brandy's with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Your mommy deserves to be celebrated." Later that evening, after Imani was tucked into bed with her latest library book, Brandy and Ezra found themselves on the terrace of the main house. The view never got old, the Bay Area spread out below them like a carpet of lights. "You said you wanted to talk about important things," Brandy said, settling into the chair beside him. Ezra was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in his glass. "The custody arrangement we worked out was temporary. We both knew that." Brandy's stomach tightened. "Are you unhappy with how things are working?" "No, the opposite. I'm happier than I've ever been." He turned to face her fully. "But I want more, Brandy. For all of us." "More how?" "I want us to be a real family. Not just co-parents sharing space, but more." His voice was soft but certain. "I want to wake up in the same house as my daughter every day. I want to help with homework and bedtime stories and middle-of-the-night fever checks." "You already do most of those things," Brandy pointed out. "But I want the right to do them. I want to adopt Imani officially, give her my name if she wants it. I want to set up college funds and trust accounts. I want to make sure she's protected if anything happens to me." The practical considerations made sense, but Brandy sensed there was more. "And?" Ezra set down his wine glass and moved closer. "And I want to explore what's been building between us. This thing we keep dancing around but never addressing directly." Brandy's breath caught. She'd felt it too, the lingering glances, the casual touches that lasted a beat too long, the way conversations felt charged with unspoken possibilities. "Ezra, we have to be careful. Imani's happiness comes first." "I agree completely. But don't you think she'd be happiest with parents who love each other?" His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "I'm falling in love with you, Brandy. Maybe I already have." The confession hung in the air between them, beautiful and terrifying. "We barely knew each other 4 years ago. We're still getting to know each other now. Then let's keep getting to know each other. Properly this time. Dates, conversations, shared experiences that aren't just about Imani." His thumb traced across her knuckles. "I want to court you, Brandy Jones. Old-fashioned, intentional, take-our-time courtship. While living in your guest house and co-parenting your daughter?" Brandy couldn't help but smile at the complexity of it. "While building something real together. All three of us." Before Brandy could respond, the sound of small feet on the terrace interrupted them. Imani appeared in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed elephant. "I had a bad dream," she announced, climbing onto Ezra's lap without hesitation. "There were monsters, but they weren't scary monsters. They were just lonely and needed friends." "That doesn't sound like a bad dream," Brandy said, smoothing her daughter's hair. "It wasn't bad. Just sad. The monsters reminded me of how Daddy used to be lonely in his big house before we came." Imani looked between her parents with 4-year-old wisdom. "But now nobody's lonely anymore, right?" Ezra's arms tightened around his daughter. "Right. No more loneliness." "Good." Imani yawned, settling more comfortably against his chest. "Daddy, will you carry me back to bed? And maybe stay until I fall asleep?" "Of course, sweetheart." As Ezra stood with Imani in his arms, she looked over his shoulder at Brandy. "Mommy, are you coming too? Family bedtime is the best bedtime." Brandy's heart melted. Family bedtime it is. They settled into Imani's bed together, their daughter between them, and took turns reading from her favorite story collection. Imani's eyes grew heavy as the familiar tales washed over her. "I'm 78 years old. I don't have time for subtlety." Eleanor looked expectantly between them. "Well?" The party guests had given up all pretense of not listening. Even the children had quieted, sensing something important was happening. Brandy felt trapped in a spotlight she'd never asked for. Ezra stood slowly, brushing grass off his swim trunks, and extended his hand to her. "Walk with me." Heart hammering, Brandy let him pull her to her feet. They walked to the edge of the garden, away from their audience but still visible to the party. The afternoon sun cast everything in golden light, and she could hear Imani's excited whispers behind them. "Brandy," Ezra began, then stopped, running his hand through his damp hair. "This isn't how I planned to do this." "Do what?" But even as she asked, she saw him reach into the pocket of his discarded shirt and pull out the small velvet box she'd glimpsed in his office weeks ago. "I bought this 2 months ago," he said, his voice steady despite the obvious nerves. "I've been carrying it around, waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect words. But maybe our daughter is right. Maybe the perfect moment is just now." He dropped to one knee right there on the grass, in front of their families and friends and a dozen 5-year-olds who had never seen a real proposal before. The collective gasp from their audience was audible, but Brandy barely heard it. "Brandy Jones, you gave me the most precious gift in the world without even knowing it. You raised our daughter to be kind, curious, brilliant, and brave. You've made me a better man just by letting me be part of your lives." He opened the box to reveal a stunning solitaire diamond that caught the afternoon sunlight and threw rainbows across the grass. "I love you. I love our family. Will you marry me?" The world seemed to hold its breath. Brandy was dimly aware of phones recording the moment, of Eleanor's satisfied smile, of the children's wide-eyed fascination. But her focus narrowed to Ezra's face, to the hope and vulnerability in his mismatched eyes, to the future he was offering with trembling hands. "Yes," she whispered, then louder as joy bubbled up from somewhere deep in her chest. "Yes." The cheer that erupted from the party guests was deafening, but it was nothing compared to Imani's shriek of pure delight as she launched herself at her newly engaged parents. "I knew it," she shouted, bouncing between them as Ezra slipped the ring onto Brandy's finger. "I knew you loved each other. This is the best birthday ever." As Ezra stood and kissed her for the first time in front of their daughter, Brandy felt the last of her walls crumble. The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise, tasting of chlorine and birthday cake and new beginnings. "About time," Eleanor muttered from her chair, then raised her champagne glass to the crowd. "To the happy couple. And to fairy tale endings that are really just new beginnings." The toast was echoed by everyone present, but Brandy barely heard it. She was too busy being kissed by the father of her child, surrounded by the family they'd built from hope, second chances, and one little girl's unshakable belief in happily ever after. "So when's the wedding?" Imani demanded, tugging on both their hands. "Can I be the flower girl again? I'm really good at it now." Ezra and Brandy looked at each other and burst into laughter. "We just got engaged 30 seconds ago," Brandy pointed out. "But I want to plan everything. Can we have it here? With the pool and the pretty lights? And can I wear a princess dress?" Imani's excitement was infectious, her questions tumbling over each other. "We'll plan it together," Ezra promised, lifting her into his arms. "All 3 of us." "4 of us," Eleanor corrected, approaching with a fresh glass of champagne for the bride-to-be. "Someone needs to make sure you don't elope to Vegas like your grandfather and I did." "You eloped to Vegas?" Brandy asked, surprised. "Biggest mistake of my life. No proper wedding photos, no family celebration, no chance to show off my dress." Eleanor's eyes twinkled with mischief. "We're doing this properly. I'm thinking spring in the garden, with enough flowers to make the neighbors jealous." As the party continued around them, with children splashing in the pool and adults toasting their engagement, Brandy marveled at how perfectly everything had fallen into place. 6 months ago, she'd been a struggling single mother worried about paying bills. Now she was engaged to the love of her life, surrounded by family, with a daughter who believed in fairy tales and a future that sparkled as brightly as the diamond on her finger. "No regrets?" Ezra asked quietly, his arm around her waist as they watched Imani show off her engagement ring to her friends. "Only one," Brandy said, leaning into his warmth. "What's that?" "That it took us 4 years to find each other again." She looked up at him, her heart full to overflowing. But maybe that's what makes this even more precious. Maybe, he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. But I plan to make up for every lost day. We have the rest of our lives for that, Brandy said softly. The rest of our lives, he repeated like a promise. I like the sound of that. 1 year later, Brandy stood in the same vineyard where their story had begun, but this time she was the bride. The morning sun filtered through the oak trees as she adjusted her simple but elegant wedding dress, watching through the bridal suite window as guests took their seats for the ceremony. Nervous? Victoria asked, appearing beside her with a warm smile. She looked radiant in her role as matron of honor, her own engagement ring catching the light as she smoothed Brandy's veil. Excited, Brandy corrected, her heart full as she spotted Ezra at the altar, looking devastatingly handsome in his charcoal gray suit. I can't believe we're actually here. I can, Eleanor said from her chair, where she was supervising Imani's final flower girl preparations. Some love stories are worth the wait. Imani twirled in her pale pink dress, her flower basket perfectly arranged with white rose petals. Mommy, you look like a real princess. Daddy's going to cry happy tears when he sees you. Are you ready for your big moment, sweetheart? Brandy asked, kneeling to adjust her daughter's flower crown. I've been practicing all week, Imani said solemnly. This time I know exactly what to do. Walk slowly, sprinkle the petals, and don't shout anything surprising. The adults laughed, remembering the chaos of that first wedding day that had brought them all together. As the bridal march began, Brandy felt a deep sense of rightness settle over her. This wasn't just a wedding, it was the completion of a family that had been meant to be from the very beginning. Imani walked down the aisle with perfect composure, scattering rose petals with artistic precision. When she reached the altar, she gave Ezra a thumbs up and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "She looks beautiful, Daddy." Then it was Brandy's turn. As she walked toward the man who had become her everything, she saw their future stretching out before them, more children perhaps, family vacations, quiet Sunday mornings, and a love that had been tested by time and proven unbreakable. When Ezra took her hands at the altar, his eyes bright with unshed tears, she knew that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most unexpected moments. "Ready to live happily ever after?" he whispered. "With you and Imani? I've been ready since the moment she called you Daddy." And as they exchanged vows surrounded by family and friends, Brandy knew that fairy tales weren't just for children after all. Sometimes they were for grown-ups brave enough to believe in second chances, patient enough to build love slowly, and wise enough to recognize that the best families are the ones that choose each other. The flower girl had found her prince, the prince had found his family, and they all lived happily ever after. Thank you for watching Mr. Ashbourne Golden Narratives. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and share it with someone who believes in the power of love and family.